welcome to Behind the Ballet. I'm Elizabeth Kaye, and today I'll be telling you about the crown jewel of classical ballet, Swan Lake. ABT's version of this lush ballet was choreographed by the company's longtime and now former artistic director, Kevin McKenzie. When it premiered during the spring season of the year 2000, the leading roles were danced beautifully by ABT's new artistic director, Susan Jaffe, and Jose Manuel Carreño. Swan Lake was created in the 19th century, and over the years there have been many different versions of this gorgeous ballet. But one essential element is always the same, the music. And that is why I want to tell you about the undisputed genius who composed that music, Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky, a haunted soul who brought exquisite beauty to this world, and who not only loved ballet, but felt it, and whose music remains the essence of balletic scope and grace. Here is Tchaikovsky as a young man, and here he is in later life. Tchaikovsky was born in 1840, and he was the first serious composer to write specifically for ballet. Before him, ballet music was composed by what were called specialists, who wrote music that was light and melodic. The Ludwig Minkus score for Don Quixote, for instance, or the Giselle score by Adolphe Adam. But Tchaikovsky was different. He was the foremost composer of his time, and his burning desire to compose for ballet would inspire other serious composers. Without his trailblazing example, we might not have Prokofiev's stunning score for Romeo and Juliet, or ballet music from Igor Stravinsky, who revered Tchaikovsky and throughout his life cherished his memory as a boy of catching a glimpse of the great man at a concert just weeks before Tchaikovsky died. You would not know it from Tchaikovsky's assertive music, but he was socially uneasy and often agonizingly shy. He once said, "There was a time when I was so possessed by this fear of mankind that I became almost insane." So he must have been massively relieved when the wealthy woman who offered to become his patron said she would support him handsomely, provided that they never meet. Mrs. von Meck adored his music and worried that Tchaikovsky the man could never live up to her fantasies of Tchaikovsky the genius. This is what Tchaikovsky wrote to her. "I'm not at all surprised that in spite of your love of my music, you do not want to make my acquaintance. You are afraid that you will fail to find in my personality all those qualities with which your idealizing imagination has endowed me. And you are quite right." So for the next 14 years, they communicated through letters, 1,200 letters in all. That's about 2 letters a week. And theirs became an intimate, though distant friendship, which suited Tchaikovsky perfectly. Yet despite his nearly pathological unease with people, when it came to his art, Tchaikovsky was fearless. And in an age of increasing intellectual rigidity, he composed music that was filled with tumultuous emotionality. This was music that reflected his own conflicts, the tension between gentleness and power, between masculine and feminine, between reason and feeling. By 1875, he had to his credit operas and symphonies, chamber music quartets, orchestral suites, and more. But he had never composed a ballet score, and when he was invited to do so, the idea appealed to him. The themes of this ballet would be sweeping and grand, love and death, doom and duty and infidelity. He set to work brimming with inspiration and pouring his heart into the music. But despite his passion and painstaking efforts, the ballet, though not an outright failure, was far from a blazing success. And it may surprise you that this distinctly mediocre production was Swan Lake. This Swan Lake premiered in 1877 and was burdened with a choreographer who was seriously out of his depth, and an orchestra conductor who was, in the words of Tchaikovsky's brother, a semi-amateur who had never been confronted with so complicated a score. But it was the critics' negative response to his music that particularly stung Tchaikovsky. As a rule, he would be enthusiastic about his works, before becoming disappointed with them. And when the reviews declared his Swan Lake score to be too noisy, overwrought, and too symphonic, he reverted to type, insisting that poor reviews were exactly what the work deserved. But he must have been terribly disappointed, because Swan Lake was not merely work for him. It was deeply personal. Swans and ballerinas and their elegant, elongated delicacy resonated for him. 6 years earlier, in the summer of 1871, he had composed and choreographed a miniature ballet for his sister's children, which he titled The Lake of the Swans, and he would use its principal theme, the Song of the Swans, in the full-length Swan Lake. So you can see why this negative response to his first ballet music left him sorrowing and wondering if he would ever contribute to ballet, this art that he loved so much. 12 years later, in 1889, he was asked to compose the score for a new ballet based on the classic fairy tale, The Sleeping Beauty. This time, the choreographer was the brilliant Marius Petipa, a Frenchman who migrated to Russia, where he became principal choreographer of the Imperial Ballet. Petipa is ballet's irreplaceable figure. He was a master craftsman who flooded the stage with dancers he configured into human architecture. He was an artist who heightened the supreme courtliness of male dancers as they partnered their ballerinas, and created for his ballerinas the most dazzling, intricate passages of dance. He is justly celebrated as the father of classical ballet, and it is no exaggeration to say that without Petipa, ballet as we know it simply could not exist. Petipa's choreography is one pillar upholding the magnificence of ballet. Another pillar is the music of Tchaikovsky, of whom George Balanchine said, "If it weren't for Tchaikovsky, there wouldn't be any dancing." In working with Tchaikovsky, Petipa gave precise instructions, dictating for each dance how many bars of music it should contain, as well as the tone and the tempo. For most composers, it would be deadening to work in such a restrictive way, yet Tchaikovsky created a score of unmatched beauty and harmony. In a letter to his patron, Tchaikovsky wrote, "The subject is so poetic, so inspirational, that I am captivated by it." Sleeping Beauty was a huge success and recognized as an incandescent work. Tchaikovsky was deeply gratified, and Petipa hungered for another triumph. So a year later, he asked Tchaikovsky to compose the score for a new ballet, The Nutcracker. But Tchaikovsky was never happy with this ballet, though he knew he'd written lovely music for it, and he combined 8 of those pieces into a Nutcracker Suite, which has become familiar over the years to anyone who's ever gone ice skating or been in a mall at Christmas time. When the Nutcracker premiered in December 1892, Tchaikovsky wrote to a friend saying, "In spite of all the sumptuousness, it did turn out to be rather boring." He also described it as infinitely worse than Sleeping Beauty. So can you imagine how amazed he would be that the Nutcracker, with the plot and the dances revised, but his own score intact, has become such a beloved holiday ritual? Working with Tchaikovsky was a sublime experience for Petipa, who became convinced that the problem of the composer's beloved Swan Lake could not have been the music. So Petipa decided to restage this ballet, and Tchaikovsky was delighted. He had the greatest respect for Petipa, of whom he said, "Never with anyone but Petipa would I produce ballets." Just when plans to recreate Swan Lake were coming to fruition, Tchaikovsky died at the age of 53. In the wake of his death, Petipa forged ahead with Swan Lake. He would create Acts 1 and 3, while his assistant, Lev Ivanov, would create Acts 2 and 4, which are known as the White Acts for the simple reason that in them, every female dancer is costumed in a white tutu. And as Petipa made strategic changes to the story and worked with the Imperial Ballet's conductor to reorder and trim Tchaikovsky's original score, They transformed Swan Lake into the theatrical classic it is today. Here is a photo of the original 1895 cast. It shows some of the Swan Maidens and the Prince. Just looking at this image gives you a sense of how far ballet has advanced since then. Every dancer, then and now, seeks to master the two distinct aspects of their art. Technique, which is the skill with which you execute the steps, and artistry, which is the way you portray your character and their emotions. In Swan Lake, the lead ballerina is tasked with portraying the twin role of the white swan and the black swan. The black swan is a brazen temptress. The white swan is all delicacy and woundedness. So these roles demand two entirely different characterizations and physicality. With the ballerina switching from the white swan to the black swan and back to the white swan again, makes this twin role so artistically complex and technically arduous that it is usually the first ballet an older ballerina retires. As the white swan, one of the many things you need to do is use your arms as if they were wings, which gives a very fluid look to the arms. The end of the black swan's pas de deux contains one of ballet's most bravura steps, the fouette, which means whipped. It requires the ballerina to whip her body around, not just once, but 32 times, and to do this in time with the music. There's nowhere to hide, no room for error. If you wobble or worse, fall out of the fouettes, the entire audience will know it. In Swan Lake, Odette, once a young and beautiful princess, has been cursed by the evil von Rothbart to be a woman by night and a swan by day. The young prince who will fall in love with her is a naive, tender soul. At the celebration of his 21st birthday, his mother, the queen, tells him in mime, "It's time for you to choose a wife." She points to her ring finger. But the prince longs for something he's yet to find, and he goes off by himself to the lake in the forest, where he encounters Odette in her swan form. She is the white swan, and she entrances him and tells him of the curse put upon her, and that it can be broken only if a man vows his love to her. But if he breaks that vow, she will be condemned to be a swan forevermore. In this sense, Odette is a classic victim, restricted from determining her fate, which will be determined instead either by the sorcerer who cast his wicked spell on her, or by a young man's fidelity, or his unfaithfulness. The prince vows his love to her, but Rothbart is intent on keeping Odette a swan. So he connives to fool the prince into breaking his vow. He summons his daughter, Odile, the black swan. Her mission is to deceive the innocent prince into believing that she's the white swan, and through a dance that is a seductive manipulation, trick him into declaring his love for her. And the deception works. The prince vows his love to the black swan, only to realize his soul-crushing mistake. Repentant and horrified, he rushes to the lake, where he finds Odette, the white swan, who is bereft of hope and grieving. Though she forgives him, the time has come for her to shed her victimhood and take charge of her fate. Having been betrayed and now condemned to be a swan forevermore, she refuses to be accursed. Instead, she chooses to break the evil spell that binds her in the one way she can, by ending her life. She hastens to the top of a cliff and hurls herself off it into the lake below. The prince, knowing that she is his one true love, follows her off the cliff to his death. Now the evil spell has been broken, and von Rothbart is vanquished. A moment later, we see the two lovers joined in the afterlife to be together forever. Thus, Swan Lake tells us that our fate is never beyond our grasp, and that love is stronger than death and prevails over everything. Tragically, by the time Swan Lake premiered in 1895, the man who put his soul into it, Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky, lay in his final resting place in Alexander Nevsky Monastery, never to know that his Swan Lake has become one of ballet's most revered and cherished works. Yet, though he died 130 years ago, he is still with us, for his music is and will always be sparkling and heartrending and eternal. And so, when you see ABT's performance of his beloved Swan Lake, I hope you'll take a moment to think of him. Thank you for joining me for Behind the Ballet with Elizabeth Kaye.